The Sony A7 III is one of the best cameras currently on the market and might be the best camera of 2018. It shoots full frame 4K, has battery life for days, and has Sony's brand new color science. The Lumix G7 on the other hand also shoots 4K, also has awesome battery life, and is a quarter of the price. The gap between budget and borderline professional might not be as big as you think. Can the Lumix G7 keep up? Let's find out. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I can already hear the angry typing right now, being mad at me for daring to compare these two cameras. But we mustn't let that deter us. Sometimes we need to be reminded that we don't need to actually spend the absolute top dollar to get really good camera gear. We found out on Monday that the Lumix is really darn good for a 4-year-old camera, and on Wednesday we discovered that compared to other budget cameras in the same price range, it's a very versatile all-in-one package. But the main point of today is I want you to actually see the gap between the G7, a 4-year-old micro four thirds camera, and the Sony A7 III, a 2018 powerhouse. Isn't that big, and for online content purposes is even smaller. Now, in all fairness, I personally use the A7 III, and it's currently one of my favorite cameras ever made. But just because I like it and use it doesn't mean that you need to get one or use one. But you'd be in a good place if you got one, and there might be some links in the description of this video if you want to get either of these cameras. I'm just saying. In fact, in a surprise move, this video so far has been shot on the G7. Dun dun dun. And if I'm gonna say that the cameras are close, let's lay out the basic specs of both cameras to get on the same page. Doing some dancing, interpretive dancing specs. The A7 III is Sony's basic model. That's a joke of theirs. It comes with a 24 megapixel full frame XMOR sensor. It can record in 4K 24 frames per second, full frame, and 30 frames per second with a small crop. It has 5-axis Ibis and one of the very best autofocus systems in the game today with 693 phase detection autofocus points. I love saying that. It's just one of my favorite things to say. The Lumix G7 on the other hand is what you would also call the Panasonic basic model. It comes with a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, can also record in 4K 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. It also has a fully articulating touchscreen and some of the best preamps I've ever heard in a camera. You know, what you're hearing now. Now, a fun factoid that I want to bring up before we really start digging into the comparisons is I've actually used these two cameras, they're currently both recording right now. I've used these two cameras more than any other camera I've ever owned. And so I have some serious opinions about using both, and seeing as how I put hundreds of hours of use into each of them. Okay, with that out of the way, let's see if we've gotten a break in the hurricane rain that's been going on for 2 days to do some outdoor shooting and make some comparisons. Ha! Okay, so we caught a few minutes where we can actually do some filming outside before the big storm gets here. So I'm not gonna tell you yet. As I'm talking for the next couple of seconds, I want you to think of which camera that you think is the Lumix G7 and which camera that you think is the Sony A7 III. Now, what I've done to make it a little more fair is I popped the kit lens of my A5100 onto the I almost pointed at it. Onto the A7 III, so it should make it a little more fair, make it more about the image quality and less about the sensor, since they're both rocking kit lenses right now. So which one do you think is which? Okay, so this is the Lumix G7 and this is the Sony A7 III. Both are phenomenal cameras, and in a situation like this, and this is basically how I do a lot of my videos, I'm just standing here talking at the camera. Now, one of the major benefits that we've talked all week about the Lumix G7 is it is an all-in-one package. So you can see right here that the Lumix G7 does everything that I need it to do by itself. It's got the audio and the screen built into the camera. That's it. That's all you need. Like, that's not even a camera bag's worth of stuff. That's just like, I don't know, a regular man purse's worth of stuff that you can just easily carry with you. Now, the Sony A7 III on the other hand, now this is my stripped down version. Normally I have it in a cage because I don't like using this little mount that came with the monitor, but you can see it needs a cable, needs a battery, needs the monitor, needs all of this extra stuff to work. Now, when you've got a full frame lens on the A7 III, yeah, the image quality, but if you're just doing quick online stuff, do you really need all that stuff? The Lumix G7, super light, super portable, all-in-one system. The A7 III, very high quality, very expensive, but can get some beautiful image quality. And the sun keeps messing up my exposure. And the sun can't decide whether it wants to be behind the clouds or in front of my clouds. So my exposure is gonna go up and down a little bit, so meh. But yeah, so both cameras are great. Yeah, so what I want to show you and what we'll talk about more here in a second is, I'm not trying to say that the G7 is better than the A7 III. I mean, it is in some categories, but what I'm really trying to say is that the Lumix G7 for $500 can really compete with a $2,000 camera when you consider just image quality alone. The skin colors look great, the audio is excellent, the preamps are wonderful. The really big negative, and we'll do some really unprofessional tests here, but the autofocus on the G7 is not very great. The autofocus on the A7 III is one of the best in the business. It's 693 autofocus points where it just crushes it. Now you can see, you saw earlier the A7 III is tracking my face. It knows what it wants to do, but it's got to hunt for that focus, so okay. All right, before the rain comes, let's see if we can get some more footage to make a little bit more of a comparison, but I'll see you back in the studio. And we're back. So let's talk about some of the things that I both like and dislike about both cameras. Now we're gonna show both the feeds again. Because for all the things that I really like about both, neither is perfect. In fact, my perfect camera, the camera that would be perfectly made for me, isn't even on the market yet, but that's a video for another day. First up, let's cover the major benefits of both cameras. Let's do age before beauty, so let's dive into the Lumix G7 first. Like I mentioned in both the Monday video and the Wednesday video, the major benefit of the G7 is it is a surprisingly well put together all-in-one package for a fraction of what the competition cost. Hint, hint, A7 III. It really is a great first video camera due to not only having a really great image that in the past week of making videos it really has surprised me with how good it is. I remember it being a great camera. I wouldn't have used it for so long without it being a great camera. But after using more expensive cameras for a while, I guess I just assumed that somehow this low cost would need to cut some corners in the image quality department. But it really doesn't do that at all. The image quality coming out of the G7 is, it's shockingly good. I like the touchscreen interface on the fully articulating screen. Something that's really handy when you spend so much of your time in front of the camera is being able to see your settings. Know that you're recording. You can see your audio levels, and you can actually change the settings when you're in front of the camera. Canon is a company that also does this really well, and I've ruined entire videos shot on the A7 III because the camera stopped recording and I didn't know. It could be stopped right now and I would have no idea. I'm just kind of trusting that it's working. Something else I really like is the smallness and the compactness of the lenses. We'll talk more about lens size here in a little bit. If you've seen my camera setup, and my camera bag isn't very big, so bringing along big gear means that I don't get to bring my action camera or my gimbal or some other piece of gear that I really want to bring. I like smaller gear whenever possible. On the A7 III side, however, there are some really serious benefits too. The autofocus on the A7 is just wonderful. I just leave it in continuous autofocus all the time because I trust it to work. Something that I hate having to do is to mess around with the camera. I like hitting record and just getting the content I need and just being done with it. Fiddling around with autofocus settings is something that I won't tolerate anymore with a camera. It has to just work, and if it doesn't just work, I'll get rid of it. Another huge benefit of the A7 III is the color. I think the image coming straight out of this camera is it is exactly what I want my image to look like. And at the end of the day, is that not what we're using cameras for? Like, you want it to look good without having to put some post-processing in. If you're an online content creator and you got that workflow that's gotta go, we gotta go. We don't have time to mess around with it. Another camera that I used for a very long time was the Sony A7III. And while it was great, it had great autofocus, great 4K, my skin would look off from time to time. And it would look like somebody had just straight, punched me in the face. I'd always have these black eyes. And so whatever Sony has done with their color engine, they've really done it right, especially with the A7 III line. The customization on the A7 III is also a huge benefit. Almost every button on the body is customizable, and you can change to whatever you want to. I personally have the C1 as my digital clear zoom. The C2 is used for an extra record button. That's a habit from the A6300 days. C4 is set to my crop mode, which I use all the time. And the menu dial is set to control the ISO. Seriously, you can make this camera your own camera, which, that is just awesome, including the My Menu stuff. You can have a whole menu set up with whatever you want it to be. Okay, Everyday Dad, you did say earlier that these weren't perfect, right? They're not perfect, right? I think so. Yes, shockingly enough, there are some things about both cameras that I don't actually like. And they both have potential deal breakers hiding in them depending on how you make your online content. Since we started with the G7, let's keep that train a-rolling. The main thing that really hampers the G7, and really the only major negative I personally have with the camera is it uses a contrast-based autofocus system. That's tough. You know, I'm not gonna explain in too much detail since this is the third time this week I've mentioned it. Needless to say, that's pretty rough, especially, again, if you are in front of the camera most of the time. Like I just mentioned with the A7 III, I'm leaving this in continue autofocus so you can see how it works. But if I were making videos with this consistently, I would not be able to do that because I don't like how it looks when you do that. Another negative about the G7, which really, because of its price point, it's not that big of a deal, but it doesn't have Panasonic's legit Ibis system or any Ibis at all. Now, again, that's not a huge deal because I don't know a camera at this price that does have Ibis built in. Now, some do have electronic stabilization, like this Canon M100, but nothing in the body. And as far as negatives go, that's really it. It is shocking how much of a well put together package the G7 is, considering the price. I mean, find me something else that does this at this price point. Okay, now let's talk about the things that I don't like about the A7 III, which breaks my heart because the A7 III is kind of like my second child. First and foremost, and yes, this is the potential deal breaker I mentioned earlier, the Sony lens selection. Now, I know that's gonna sound weird. Sony full-frame lenses are beautiful and very functional, but they are expensive, and they are also heavy. Honestly, one of the reasons I don't plan on staying with Sony full frame as in my long-term solution is the lenses. I tried using a 24-105 G lens for a few days and it was way too big to be something that I would ever want to carry around. Yes, the lens was beautiful, the image was awesome, everything about the Sony G Master lenses is great. They are just too big for what I would want to do. Like, I can't carry around that kind of gear. It is heavier than this whole other camera, and for online stuff, I can't carry it. The lenses are too big for me personally. And the other real thing holding the A7 III back from being my perfect camera is it continues to have this like quasi-articulating screen instead of having a fully articulating screen. Yeah, these both have pretty small negative lists for me. I mean, there is a reason I've used both of these cameras for almost 8 months each. They are workhorses that can carry your online content as far as you want to take it. So what, right? So obviously the Sony is the camera that I prefer and I use it darn near every day and I'm a huge fan of it. But the point of this video isn't to say how much I like the A7 III. I've got plenty of other videos that say that, but it's to show you that the budget G7 isn't actually that far off, especially if you are delivering your content online. And most online platforms have their very own compression, and that will change up your image quality in subtle and, not so subtle ways. Either way, so if you're uploading in 1080p or 4K, you're gonna have to deal with Twitter's compression, you're gonna have to deal with YouTube's compression, you're gonna have to deal with Instagram's compression. The G7 just works for a quarter of the price. Now, I like both, and I think both are great, and if you are someone that is looking for a camera, either would work, so depending on your budget, either would be a great option. Thanks for watching.